Welcome to video 2. This is week 2 content, and we're talking about growth and development. There are two main forms of development in children, gross motor and fine motor. Gross motor is the whole body moving, jumping, climbing, rolling over, moving their head up and down. And fine motor has more to do with use of the hands, the pincher reflex, eating Cheerios, that kind of thing. By the time a child is 2, they're jumping, climbing stairs, they can kick a ball. By age 3, they can stand on one foot, they can play hopscotch, they can hold a handrail and go up and down using alternate steps. They can pedal a tricycle and stand on one foot. And all of this is really big deal to them and an incredibly normal and important part of their development. As they continue to grow, by 4, they're hopping and walking downstairs. They can do it without the handrails. It's a little bit scary. And when you're instructing parents, you should tell them to always have their children use the handrail, whether they need it or not, because it does prevent accidental falls. By 5 years, they're riding a bike. They can skip, they can jump 3 or 4 steps, they can run and play. When they're riding a bike, again, anticipatory guidance for a parent, make sure the child is wearing a helmet that is fitted properly and secure. They keep on growing, and by 6 years, they're jumping rope. They're starting to play baseball. They're acquiring balance, and they can start to play more complexly, organized sports, t-ball, soccer, all of those things. They're starting to understand concepts of team and their part on that team. After they've fully developed their gross motor skills, and of course, developing motor skills is a lifelong thing for sure, but let's go back to when they're tiny and talk about their fine motor skills. And that starts with a grasp reflex. When they're born, if you put your finger on near their hand, they will grasp a hold of your fingers. Urban legend is when a child is first born, if you had them grab their fingers, and you lifted them up only by their fingers, with them holding onto your fingers, they are so strong that you can actually hold them that way. I don't think I would try that on a brand new baby, but you certainly could. By 3 months, the grasp reflex is gone, and then they open and close their hands intentionally. And you'll see them pulling on clothes, pulling on anything they can actually get a hold of. And by age 4, they start to have age 4, I should say 4 months, they start to have eye-hand coordination. So they can look at something, know they want to hold it, and grasp it with 1 or 2 hands. Then by 6 months, they're holding a bottle or a cup. And you can see on this slide, it says they hold a bottle at 6 months, they hold a cup at 7. Honestly, there is not any difference in the fine motor skills of holding a bottle or holding a cup. It's more of more children at this age use cups than at 6 months old. When they're 6 months, they can drop something and they can scoot to pick it up. Whether they roll over to do that, reach for it. By 7 months, they're transferring things from one hand to the other. And 8 to 10 months, the forefinger and the thumb work together. So that's the pincher grasp, and that's when Cheerios come in to play. Cheerios, nutritionally, I suppose they're fine, but that's not really the reason you give your child Cheerios. The real reason is to develop their fine motor skills. Between 10 months and a year, the child has learned to stack blocks. If you give them a piece of paper and a writing utensil, they will scribble on it. They can use basic tools. They can pound on something. They can put toys in a box. They're starting to learn to pair socks, that sort of thing. I'm not saying they'll match them, but they can certainly start putting them together. By 2 years, eye-hand coordination is getting pretty good. Again, they're scribbling. They can, if you have those large beads with large holes, they can string beads, and they can hold a cup well, certainly in one hand. As they continue to grow, by age 3, they're drawing straight lines. They're starting to make pictures that you can actually tell it's a picture. On this slide, they can pour from a pitcher, and what that means is a very small child-sized toy pitcher, not a big at the dinner table pitcher. And usually you will see ambidextrous hand movement. So they might be writing with their right hand for a while, and then you'll see them writing with their left hand, and vice versa. A lot of times children who are dominantly left-handed, they'll start using their dominant left hand almost from birth. It's really kind of cool to watch. By 4 years, they can use the scissors pretty well, and they can do the basis of tying their shoelaces, which is an important skill to know. By age 5 or 6, they can use a hammer and they can pound nails. Lowe's has a really cool program for small children. They can come with a parent. I think it's one Saturday a month, and they build a project. Very, very cool. Starts them using tools in a safe environment, getting them into building. Boys and girls can attend, and they get a little apron, and of course they get to take home whatever they made. So it's a very cool program and extremely good for fine motor skills at that age. By 7 to 8, they can start to write. Now, there's big controversy about cursive writing and its appropriateness and necessity, so I'm looking forward to that discussion in class. By age 9 to 10, they continue to have develop their eye-hand coordination, and it turns out to be pretty perfect by that time. As the child continues to develop, there are theorists who have gotten involved in helping us define what a child should be doing. Like I said, there's patterns to how children grow, and it's important that we know what's going on with them physically. Like the chart said, we want to see growth that's in motion, their weight's going up, their height's going up, their head circumferences evening out how it's supposed to. All of that's supposed to happen in order. Now, that doesn't mean all children will gain 10 pounds or grow 5 inches, but they will grow, and they'll grow in some semblance of an order, and they also develop that way intellectually and emotionally. There are 2 theorists we're going to talk about. One is Piaget, and the other one is Erikson. If I were you, I would, and I said this earlier in one of the videos, I would make a chart of my own or a list or something. In your clinical packet, there are some notes on development, and they're fine, they're good, but it's better off for your learning if you make your own. So if I were you, I would take each stage of development, the author of the theory, and make one sentence that helps you remember what it is. So Piaget, I always think of the Piaget theory as movement or building processes. And I don't know why I think that, but it just makes sense in my mind. So sensory motor stage is birth to 2 years old. Everything in a child's life at that point has to do with putting it in their mouth. So, when they're first born, their first instincts are to suck. Then as they grow older, they're picking up toys and they're putting it in their mouth. So when I think of sensory motor, I think of feeling, hearing, tasting, everything. Motor skills are starting to develop. Again, it starts by rolling of the body. And by age 2, they're of course walking and running like we discussed before. But I tend to think of Piaget's theories in a very physical sort of movement way. The next stage in Piaget's development is the toddler stage, which is 1 to 3 years. And as you can see, there's some overlap in sensory motor and the next stage. But as the sensory motor skills develop, they start to learn things like trial and error. Like they know, gosh, I tried to step on that box to reach the shelf. I couldn't reach the shelf. That didn't work. So now I have to try something else. Reasoning is starting. By the time they're like almost 2, they have some memory skills, and they're able to call on those memories. Memories are nothing but learned information. And they also begin to understand that for every action there's an equal and active reaction, including their behavior, by age 2. So when you get to the next stage of Piaget's development, they call it the pre-operational phase. And I always think of this as they're wanting to build something, but they can't do it yet. That's my sentence. they're learning all the time. They're starting to understand object permanence. The world is all about them. I think this picture is just absolutely perfect because that is just the attitude of a little tiny 2-year-old or 3-year-old for 1 minute, and then the next minute they can look like this little sweetheart here. Language is literal. So if you say the red box, the kid's looking for a box that's red, when you might be thinking it's where you take the movies back to the store. So they're, like I said, they're trying to learn how to build things, how to do things on their own. They're just not quite there yet. So once as they're developing the pre-operational phases, they are starting to use words, they're starting to put sentences together, and they're starting to play, and play is becoming a much more social interaction. Up until this age, like up until, 3, 4, play is just a personal thing they do. And if there's kids to play with, they'll play with them, but it's usually parallel play, meaning there's other kids in the room, but they're not like forming a game or rules or working together on something. They're just playing. Then as they grow, it enhances their ability to think and to reason, and they start to develop plans. And then that takes them to the next stage of development, which is the concrete operational stage. At this point, they're able to do some creating, whether it's developing a game, whether it's building a puzzle. They understand that there are relationships between point A and point B, thing 1 and thing 2. They're starting to understand conservation. Things have mass, things have shape, they have volume. They start to understand that. Pretending, of course, they still pretend in their play, but they understand that there's reality, and they understand reversibility. So let's say mom has to go to work. It's not the end of the world. They know mom's going to come home from work. And so they really start to understand that. And that takes them through like 4th or 5th grade. And then the formal operational stage comes next. And this is adolescence between like 12 to 21 years old. Formal operations is kind of where Piaget stops. And one of the reasons I'm not a real fan of Piaget is that I believe that my development is far different than that of an 11-year-old. Now, obviously, we're just building on a theory, but formal operations, abstract thought is possible. They're able to critically think, so they can problem solve at this point. And then if they're an adolescent, it's just loaded with egocentrism. This is where I think the development should continue, because when adolescence ends and adulthood begins, this egocentrism should start to wane, at least with a healthy person. So the next theorist is Erikson, and Erikson is my favorite, I have to say. And the reason why is I think his theories make the most sense, and they deal probably more with emotional and intellectual health, but they really are quite helpful. And his stages: trust and mistrust. First stage, mommy, I love mommy. Mommy hands me to another person, I cry. Trust versus mistrust. The next one is initiative versus guilt. And that is, they want to do something, they feel great about it, but when it doesn't go their way, they feel bad about it. Industry, and these are very brief explanations, by the way, we'll go over them more in class and really put some pictures together of what they are. Industry versus isolation. Industry is that need to create something. These are kids that are going to bring you home presents from school that they've made. They're going to try and make you breakfast, and they're really starting to get involved and industrious. And then, of course, the bad part of that is if for some reason they don't communicate well, they won't do that. Then there's identity versus role confusion, and this is the teenager. They want to be cool, but they're not. They don't know who they are. They don't know who they are emotionally, physically. And then the final one is